Hey guys, it's Ty from GamesFromTheFront.com here again with another play and learn video for Bloody April. Thanks for all the encouraging words on the last video. I really appreciate it. I hope you had a good time, or at least learned a couple things as I did as we went through the scenario setup. We took a look at figuring out how to set up weather, fill out log sheets, get our units on the map, and took a first peek at the Vassal module. So I'd like to get into a little bit of gameplay. As a reminder, we're dealing here with Scenario 5 from the playbook. We got a handful of British units, British flights, that are going to be doing some recon missions, taskings over the and around the trenches. We've got a couple of German flights in their aerodomes waiting for word of a possible attack from enemy units. And we've got a bunch of AA units here on the ground. In this particular video, we're going to take a look at a couple of other phases within a turn. We'll take a look at random events and the weather phase, which will also include weather drifting. There's actually a neat little marker or feature here in the Vassal module that allows you to pull up a scenario marker. So this will actually help you keep track of where you are, which phase you're in for your turn. And if you remember the last video, my British units were up here near Trezen, and we actually have moved and completed one turn and have moved away from our aerodome and are making our way to the trenches. So we're actually starting here in turn 2. And the first phase that we're going to cover is for random events. And random events start occurring or possibly occurring in round 2 or turn 2 and every turn thereafter. So you actually don't roll for this in turn 1. But the mechanism is pretty simple. You're actually going to roll a single die for both sides, and on a result of 1 or less, you actually trigger a random event. The roll itself is subject to a -2 DRM or dice roll modifier for every multiple of 10 flights that are in the air. So if you've got 10 to 20 flights in the air, or 10 to 19 I guess, it would be a -2 DRM. If it was 20 to 29, it would be -4 DRM. But again, every multiple of 10, you're going to have a -2 DRM applied to this roll. And that's fractions are rounded down. This also includes dummies. We actually don't have any dummies on the map right now, but if you're playing a scenario that has dummies or you're using them, you actually count that to into the calculation for the dice roll modifier. So actually right now we only have 2 flights in the air. The other flights, the German flights, are on the ground, but our British flights are in the air. So there's no die roll modifier. So we'll roll a single die and we get a 5. So there's no random event this turn. If we had rolled a 1 or less, we'd actually find that there is a random events table that lists out, I don't know, it looks like maybe 10 or 12 different categories of random events that may occur. Roll 2 dice on this table, and follow the instructions on how to apply this roll, how to apply this random event. But we don't have that this turn, so we will continue on to the next phase, which is the weather event subphase. Actually, this has no impact here on the second turn, but on every 10th turn in your scenario and every 10th turn thereafter, you're going to roll to see if weather changes. So again, we don't have that here in the second turn, but had we been in turn 10 or turn 20, we would actually see if there's a change in weather, and there is a weather change table for that. So you'd roll 2d10 and apply it here to this table, but we're not going to worry about that right now because it doesn't apply to us. All right, so actually the first phase that we are going to take a look at a little bit in depth is the weather drift subphase. And in the weather drift subphase, we're going to check for wind drift and adjust any flight dogfight, or defensive wheel markers. Now right now we only have flight markers in the air, so this only applies to them. But the concept is pretty simple, but the application of the concept can throw you for a loop if you haven't done it a couple times. And I've actually spent a little bit of time with this myself trying to figure it out, but the concept is simple. We rolled for weather in the scenario setup phases and came up with a 15 mile an hour wind coming out of the northwest. We're going to see through a mechanism as to whether that wind is going to move our flights and cause them to drift either through acceleration or perhaps even slowing them down in some cases. And to get a sense of whether that's going to happen or not, we need to take a close look at the rule book. So here on page 9, we actually have a very nice diagram that actually gives us quite a bit of what we need to know to make this determination. Bloody April is interesting in that there are actually only 3 wind directions that we have to worry about: northwest, southwest, and northeast. You actually cannot roll for wind direction from any other direction. It's only these 3 that are available to us. And Terry reports back, Terry the designer of the game reports back that has some historical and geographical accuracy. And so we only really need to worry about these 3 wind directions for our game. And actually for our particular scenario, again, we're only worried about the northwest. So here we have the northwest being represented, or the wind as being represented as coming out of the northwest into this hex. And you're going to have a counter for a flight that's going to be placed in this hex and facing a particular direction. There are actually 12 different facings that are possible within a hex. Your traditional hex sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what's at least new to me is actually facings into a hex corner. So we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hex corners that you can face into. So 6 hex sides, 6 hex corners make a possible 12 hex facings. Of those 12 hex facings, 5 of them will have a tailwind coming from wind that comes out of the northwest. So we've got this hex side, this hex corner, this hex side, this hex corner, and this hex side. All 5 of those facings would pick up a plus 0.5 movement because they would pick up a tailwind. Conversely, we have 5 hex sides that would pick up a headwind. Hex facings that would pick up a headwind. We've got this hex side, this hex corner, this hex side, this hex corner, and this hex side. These 5 facings would have a headwind and would pick up a minus 0.5 modifier to their movement points, slowing them down because of the headwind. Our 2 remaining facings, this corner and this corner, are for units that are facing perpendicular to this northwest wind. And in that case, there's no headwind or tailwind, but if the wind is strong enough, which is in multiples of 30 miles an hour, you can actually push your unit 1 hex in the direction of the wind. So if you were facing this hex or this hex and you had a 30 mile an hour wind coming out of the northwest, you would actually drift in this direction. But we don't have that. We actually have a 15 mile an hour wind, so we don't need to worry about that in this case. So let's go back to our Vassal module. Let's zoom in for a second and let's apply this 15 mile an hour drift. So first of all, we actually have both units are facing the same hex corner, or at least in the same direction. From the prior chart, we could tell that that was a facing that would pick up a tailwind, and so they actually pick up a plus 0.5 modifier to their movement points. This particular unit, this particular flight, did not have a pre-existing 0.5, so we're actually going to save this 0.5 modifier for later movement application. Flight 2 actually had an existing 0.5 modifier from the turn 1 movement that was not shown in this video, but I did went ahead and move this flight. And so because this is going to be a tailwind, they're going to pick up a plus 0.5 modifier as well. 0.5 plus 0.5 equals 1. So we can actually drift this unit forward 1 hex because of that tailwind. Once we've applied that, we can actually get rid of these markers, and it will no longer have that 0.5 in the bank, so to speak, for later use. So that's a pretty simple application of wind drift, but should give you a good idea of how it works. If you can think about it in the opposite, if we had a wind coming from the southeast, we would be applying headwinds rather than tailwinds. But we'll get to a few more examples of those as we get to other videos. Anyway, that's all I wanted to cover in this particular video. Pretty straightforward. Our British units are making the way to the trenches. And for next video, we will get into movement and see how the AA units on the German side sight us and react to our movements. Anyway, thanks for watching.